All right. Well, for today, we're going to have Carl, who is one of the board members of the Global Northern Colorado Global Chamber, um, talk today. And we've been actually kind of all looking forward to this. So, Carl, if you could take it away.
Fabulous. Well, welcome everybody. Let's see if I can share my screen. Do you have that turned on?
Yep.
Yes, you do. Very good. Excellent. So what I wanted to talk about today was something that I've been working on for almost a decade now. And I've called it the values-based business. I'll talk a little bit more about what that might mean, but just recognize that it's a name that I put on it. It's not necessarily a widely recognized name. I put the name on because I could get the URL and it sounded good at the time. So
Good.
it's not really more complicated than that. So back in 1970, Milton Friedman had a paper that he wrote, and it was titled "The Social Responsibility of Business to Increase Its Profits." We look back on it these days. We like to think that we're so much more enlightened, but really, he was just stating the prevailing wisdom of the time. Okay, this is what had grown up in the past couple of centuries in this country about what are businesses for? Is it just about delivering value to customers? Well, that ignores shareholders. Is it about doing stuff that the government doesn't want to do? There's a lot of different parts of it. So he was bringing out and stated very boldly that the purpose is to increase profits and to return money to shareholders. And that's it. And they don't really have much more of a reason to exist other than that. And I suppose along the way to do that, you've got to deliver value to customers. But, that wasn't his primary thinking. The questions that this raises for us is, does this really benefit customers to be thinking this way? Well, yes, in that you're not going to make a profit as a company unless you're doing something for customers, because customers are the ones that give you money. So yeah, I guess we got to do stuff for customers. Does it benefit employees? Well, it kind of depends on the culture of the company and how it wants to use employees. But that link is a bit less clear. Does it benefit local communities? Well, in that the community, if they don't like what you're doing, they will boot you out. But the communities really don't have the ability to do that, to be honest. Maybe not will benefit local communities. And does this benefit society as a whole? We've got a bunch of interesting questions that this raises for us today. But it is true that financial growth and stability do support these benefits. If I'm bringing in profit to the community, and if I can give people jobs, sure, that's a good thing. So the more that a company is financially growing and stable, then yeah, okay, we'll give you partial credit for that, right? Now, one of the newer things that is coming out here in the last few decades is the combination of for-profit thinking and nonprofit thinking. In the past, it used to be that these were very different things, night and day. If you were focused on improving society, then you're a nonprofit, make you a charity, and hope people can give you money. If you're focused on making people's lives better as consumers, then you're a for-profit, and customers are going to give you money for doing that. A lot more shades of gray between those now. And so we've developed now some integrated thinking where these two camps are learning from each other. And in fact, there's multiple models that are popping up and being very creative. And you realize that the world isn't so black and white as what we thought it was. So there's many names for this. Triple bottom line is an older term for it. Conscious business enterprise and various usages of the word conscious. B Corp. B Corp is a thing that started about 15 years ago, and it's a certification. So it's not a government thing. It's a we want to send a message to the world and prove that we're well managed, and so we'll go off and get this certification. It has some similarities to other kinds of broad certifications that exist, but this is one that was not started as a government thing. There's a thing called benefit corporation, and actually in the state of Colorado, it's a public benefit corporation is the legal term for this. In different states and different countries, you'll find various flavors of that. Corporate social responsibility, that's the way that a lot of existing companies think about sharing the wealth with their local community. And so, it starts off as, hey, let's write a check to our favorite charity at the end of the year and give some benefit to them too. And fortunately, it has become much more interesting than just writing a check at the end of the year. Now people are saying, well, can we adopt a charity? Can we do some things that are integrations between for-profit and nonprofit with some key partners? So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in that space. A new thing that just popped up relatively recently was a low profit limited liability company. Can't say I'm a big favor of the name because whenever you say low profit, then all the high profit people sort of turn at you and laugh and say, really, your desire is to intentionally be low profit? Go away, kid. We don't want to talk to you.
Carl, this is Janet. What exactly does that mean, and how would you differentiate it from a typical LLC?
Well, so it's a LLC that intentionally takes on some social responsibility aspects. And so, I could say that my LLC, it's to make a profit, but we also want to plant 1 million trees. That's part of our mission. Okay. And so these days, I might form a public benefit corporation. Before that, they were toying around with this idea of the low profit. And so by being low profit, then that somehow indicates that you use part of your profit to go out and plant trees.
Okay.
But I think it's becoming perhaps a little bit unfashionable just because of the name. Mm-hmm. And, public benefit corporation is much more attractive and sounds like a cool thing to do.
So can other companies donate to a public benefit corporation and have, that as a deduction, or, how does that?
No, it's not that kind of thing. So the rules about donating to charity, those remain the same. And basically a charity needs to be a nonprofit. However, a nonprofit can be married to a for-profit. Okay. Right. And that's not uncommon. I'll show you some examples here in a minute. But, so there's ways to kind of achieve the intent of what you're talking about, but not as directly as that.
Sure. And then one other question, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
the B Corporate certification, is that kind of like, people go out for the ISO certification or, these other certifications? It has just literally nothing to do with legal entity or anything like that.
Yeah, so in that sense, it's very similar. Um, ISO certification, though, sometimes has government endorsement and government backing, depending on what country you're in.
Right.
And so in that sense, B Corp is a bit different because it's purely not a government thing.
And they're just certifying that you're doing benefit. Is that kind of the
Yeah, and
body
well,
comes in and certifies you, or
yeah, and it's actually a pretty rigorous thing. So they learned a lot from ISO certification. So they really took that on and said, no, we're going to do a real thing that has some teeth to it. So when you see somebody that has a B Corp sign up, that says that they worked hard to prove to this independent entity that they are well run, that they do what they say they're going to do, that they treat employees right, that they treat shareholders right if you have any, right? And so it's a pretty comprehensive thing, but it's about how you run your company and how you show benefit to the world. And then, of course, that depends on what you chose as your goals. And they just prove that you do what you say you do. So you can't go out there and say, hey, we're good guys and we're saving the whales, and then spend all your money doing something else. They'll ding you for that. They say, nope, no, you're not going to pass because you're not doing what you say you do. Okay, so one of the great resources is this peterfisk.com. And so I made a direct pointer to the particular page that I was looking at. So that's JALXCV. It's a lowercase L, not the number one. Trying to pick a font where it clearly shows the difference between a lowercase L and an uppercase I and the number one. So is.gd, and that's an uppercase C there. So if you want to capture that. Okay, so an example of a for-profit, nonprofit kind of thing. I think we're probably all familiar with Panera as a restaurant. Well, that's the for-profit side of it. There's also a nonprofit side of it called Panera Cares. And this is the way that they contribute to the local community. So I was doing some work over at the food bank a few years ago, and at the end of the day, in comes this huge box. It was like 4 feet cubic or something like that, full of high quality bread from Panera. And then came in another one and another one. It's like, holy crap, Panera having a fire sale or something? What's going on here? And he says, so Panera intentionally overbakes every day. And one of the reasons they do that is to give fresh bread to their customers, because that's something they're very proud of. But it also means that at the end of every day, they have an undetermined amount of excess bread. They donate all of that to food bank. Sometimes it's 1 box, sometimes it's 5. We don't know. It'll just be, it always comes in every day at the end of the day. And it is not special stuff that they baked for food bank, which is low quality. No, this is the high quality stuff that they sell on the rack, and they empty the racks at the end of the day and they bring it over here and they give it to us. And so you can see it's a nice, beautiful mixture between their business model and doing good in the community. And the reason why they have the nonprofit in between is because then they can get some tax benefits for doing such. You'll find the same thing with OtterBox and OtterCares, by the way. They have a very similar kind of concept. Another one that I just ran across was Laureate International Universities. So very proudly a certified B Corp. You can see on the sign, of course, and they're an international business, for profit, and they have done the work to certify that indeed they give back educational services worldwide. And you know, they're proud of the fact that in places that can't afford it, they'll just give services away. In other places, like in the United States, where people are used to paying $10,000 for tuition, then they'll take that money and put some of it to benefit. So interesting little model there. This is an example that I ran across right at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is a photo from May last year, I believe. It was a cooperative venture between CSU, Copper Muse, and Gilded Goat. Copper Muse had to shut down because they weren't allowed to have their storefront open. And so nobody was buying this stuff, but they had all the equipment to go out and distill alcohol. And so what they did is they created tons of bottles of hand sanitizer. Okay, and they did this in cooperation with some other, and they didn't like actually form an extra company to do it. This was just thought of as a short-term, people in the community are worried about hand sanitizer. We can help them. Let's just do it. And so in a matter of a couple of weeks, they just put this together and they were throwing out hand sanitizer. And, you know, they eventually stopped doing it as the rest of the supply chain picked up with other companies. But it met a very critical short-term need. And it was all local here in Fort Collins. Another guy that I ran across just a few weeks ago, actually, this guy, so this is the head of Scott's Roofing, and they were started in Lafayette, Colorado, and they just expanded to Fort Collins, which is how I found out about them. One of the things they do is they work really hard on environmental sensitivity, because he was worried about the fact that all of these asphalt shingles get torn off roofs and thrown in the landfill. And it's all just total waste material, not recycled at all. Well, I mean, little fractions of it are recycled into asphalt on the roads, but it's minuscule. You know, it's just a really token thing. And so what he did is they source shingles that are made from recycled plastics. Okay, so they count their happiness based on how many plastic bottles are being kept from landfill. And then they use that as roofing materials. And they don't actually produce it. They're the installers. And they work with a company in Canada that actually produces the shingles. But they were very excited about it. And they said, okay, let's go through and do the B Corp certification. Took them like a year and a half to do it. He described that he learned so much about his own business by going through that certification. He's ended up with employees that are much more excited to work with a company that does good in the world. So anyway, that's the little bit of the story behind what they're doing. So when we're working with people who are on this journey, you know, maybe they're taking an existing company or starting a new one, or thinking about reformulating somehow, doing a big pivot. This is what I work with people on. This is where we start. So I always start with the goals. So what really is your goal and why? and why that? Okay, so somebody might say, okay, I'm worried about environmental causes, and I just really tears my heart out of how many gazillions of plastic bottles we are throwing in the landfill. That's just a sin to do that. Okay, so you want to do something about that. Okay, why this? Why is it that particular thing is just your personal interest? Is there a bigger story behind it? Do you have maybe connections into the particular recycling industry, or the particular landfill industry, or maybe you have some expertise in plastics that could apply, and you think, hey, I can bring this knowledge into fixing this kind of problem. And then why are you thinking of doing this as a company? It's like, well, I would really like to give people jobs. I don't want it to just be a charity thing that I'm doing on the side and I never have enough money. So I want to make some money. I want to actually pay people well for the work that they do. Doesn't mean I'm going to pay them, 10 times the going wage, but, maybe I can give them a little bit of profit sharing or up the pay $1 an hour, because we're the good guys in the industry. All right. So how are we going to do this? Well, I saw a thing on Channel 6 that they talked about this neat idea in the roofing industry, and I can totally do that. I have some background in this, and it tweaked my interest, and so yeah, I've been thinking about going out and saying, roofing company, environmentally sensitive, because that's like totally an unusual thing. And I'll measure it in terms of plastic bottles saved from the landfill. Why not? Because that would be cool. And then we talk about what's the best structure. Okay, we talk about for-profits and nonprofits and for-benefit corporations, and B Corp certification comes into the picture, and talk about, well, that's B Corp is fine, but it's not a legal structure. So you still got to decide, or I'm going to be an LLC or a C Corp or an S Corp or a whatever. So anyway, this is the way that people get started on the journey. And then, of course, you have to go through and do all the normal business stuff. I mean, even if you're a nonprofit, it's all the normal business stuff. People just don't use business language, but it's the same thing. The way I talk to nonprofits about is, okay, so you don't call them customers. You call them the people we serve. You call them beneficiaries, maybe? What's a good term for that? And they're not the people that give you money. So what's the name of the people that give you money? Well, they're called donors, or, maybe our partners. Maybe we'll call them partners in some cases. Okay. But all of the business basics still apply. You got to produce stuff that has value, whether it's products or services or a combination. You've got to get somebody to pay for it. You got to do it on a reasonably cost-sensitive basis so that you don't bleed your bottom line dry. It's just that at the end of the day, you're seeking a zero profit rather than a massively positive profit. But I tell you, getting up to zero profit is hard work as well, especially when you have to convince people to give you money. So, yeah, that's it.
So yeah, so when you go through that exercise with people, Carl, then is it back and forth? Do you tend to lead the conversation, or what is it that kind of comes out of that discussion? I guess is
it totally depends on where they are in their decision-making cycle. Okay. So somebody may come to you and say, I have a real passion around this area. I'm really concerned about the massive growth of depression in this country. Okay. And it's like, okay, what are you thinking? Are you thinking a nonprofit or for-profit or a user group or a special interest group kind of thing? Or maybe you want to start a newsletter and it's not a business at all in any sense, put up a website. Anybody can do that. And that's where you start teasing it out. And when it turns into something larger is when people say, I want to continue doing this for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, forever. And I want to impact a lot of people, and it's going to take some significant resources, a lot more than I have in my bank account.
Mhm.
Okay. And then you say, well, okay, then you got to get a bunch of people together. All right. They're going to have a common interest. Okay. Let's talk manager employee. Let's talk for-profit, nonprofit. Let's talk who are the people that you're benefiting, and do they have the ability to give you money for what you're doing, or would you have to get it from someplace else?
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you're a nonprofit. I mean, you could go into a partnership kind of thing. You see cases where people have a partnership with a city entity. Okay. And so, there's some great stuff that's done where the city of Fort Collins gives away money to do things more than just city services. Okay. So for instance, Innisphere gets a bit of that money because they're helping to grow industry in the area and all that kind of stuff. Now, the city has their own goals for doing that. And so you have to make sure you're meeting those goals in that area, but you might be doing other things too. Okay. So I might set up a business incubator, and as a business incubator, well, I can make money off of that, off some people, because some people have money, but maybe what I'll do is I'll teach them classes on how to get investment money, because that's what people need if you're an incubator. So you're going to teach classes, and we could charge money for the classes, sure. If I have a building, I could charge them rent. The money is ultimately coming from their investors, but that's okay. It flows through the little startup. So, there's a lot of different models, and for-profit, nonprofit doesn't begin to touch the possible number of different kinds of things that you could do.
It's so interesting. So, I happen to have a nonprofit company. I also have a for-profit company.
Mm-hmm.
Janet, I'm sure you've, experienced a lot of nonprofits, and I've just never really seen this kind of mixture or, talk, kind of heard about it, out there, but it's kind of more, you've brought it more into focus a little bit. Janet, I don't know if you've experienced this kind of,
the hybrid?
Yeah.
Yeah, on a much larger scale where that Carl's talking about, I used to be chief business officer for some fairly large universities. Mm-hmm. And universities, of course, are generically nonprofit, but they typically have a for-profit bookstore, a for-profit residence hall program, a for-profit food service program. So, and they all have to be, work together. Now, I say for-profit, they're not separate LLCs by any means, but they are there to earn a profit, not to be utilizing the resources, the nonprofit resources of the university. I actually had a situation with a client recently that we were, to a nonprofit client, that we were going to be gifted some stock in a for-profit company that really was not marketable. And the board turned it down because of that mess of for-profit and nonprofit.
Yeah, and I mean, the government has their fingers in that for good reason, and the rules are, in my mind, they're basically a response to all the ways over the years that nonprofit structures have been misused, and so somebody used a nonprofit way as a means that I can suck money out of donors and stick it in my investors' pockets. Well, come on, guys, that's not the purpose of the nonprofit. You shouldn't be able to do that. So they put a rule in place, and now you can't do that anymore. But it doesn't necessarily help you to think through what kind of structure do I want to have, especially if I'm starting out with kind of a clean slate, or I'm doing a major pivot or something like that. Then
Right.
And you could say, it's, I don't like the fact that, yeah, I can deduct a charitable donation on my tax returns. That's cool. But I'm not really having as much of an impact when I do that. I mean, what about the fact that my employees are spending time with that particular charity? Do I get credit for that? And what about my investors? I want to look like the good guy, right?
Well, actually, Carl, there is a lot of that. I used to work at the national nonprofit called Feeding America, and I'm sure you see it all over with the advertisements and things like that, the public service announcements. And Feeding America has partnered with so many companies to do what's called cause marketing initiatives. So, for example, buy a Subaru and X dollars goes to Feeding America. So a lot of companies have that nonprofit bent, if you will. And like you said earlier, a lot of them have created their own foundations or charitable arms. Most banks have charitable arms. A lot of big companies like Procter and Gamble and big consumer product companies have a nonprofit arm. So, and a lot of the employees sort of do straddle both. A lot of the accounting firms now, the big accounting firms, have nonprofit foundations.
Yeah.
And it's specifically for, they doing their charitable work.
Yeah. And what happens when you go to that work, then you get some tax benefit of doing that, which is one of the big reasons for doing it, right? If I'm making $1 billion a month, then I want to make sure that Uncle Sam doesn't get more of it than I have to absolutely pay. I get that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not my personal bank account situation, unfortunately, but
mine either.
yeah. But that's the beginning. And I like corporate social responsibility. It's great. There's no reason why you shouldn't be giving a check to Feeding America. Cool. Is that the most benefit you can be to the world? And now people are starting to wake up and say, no, when my employees can get engaged in charitable causes, either one big one or a million little ones, or when I can be contributing to the education of underserved workers, and therefore building my future employee base because I'm seen as being the good guy. Or maybe I just want to save the whales because I want to do it. Because, right, I want the world to be better for my kids than it is for me. Often it's that simple.
Right.
Well, great.
Carl,
Yeah.
have you ever heard of a company called Whole Whale? They actually are headquartered out in California.
No, I haven't. What an intriguing name.
Yeah, well, kind of you guys, the big little fish and Whole Whale, you kind of have the same mission. And if you wouldn't mind, I would like to connect you to the owner, president of this company. He's a young guy, totally dynamic. I think you guys have a lot in common.
Cool. Yeah, I'd appreciate that, Janet.
Yep.
That'd be awesome. So did you have any questions, Thierry or Ajay? You're on mute.
Yeah, always good you're in call in presentation. I like to see some fish. You didn't show that.
Well, and you know, the interesting thing about that is that our company has nothing to do with fish, of course. You know, that just happened to be the name, and then the logo came afterward. But I tell you, it's been such a strong brand presence. I would not want to change at all. I mean, we got an updated logo last year. So it looks a little bit fresher than the one I used to be using, but it's the same exact idea. And it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit of a playful brand, so we don't take ourselves too seriously. And you know, we're a small fish, you're a small fish. It's okay. We can be real. That kind of flavor.
So there is a relevance of remembering your fish. Okay.
Yeah.
And
actually,
every time I remember Carl, I remember fish. Okay.
Yeah.
And also, I remember one episode when I came first time at Colorado State as a faculty.
Mhm.
First time they said that they will go for a retreat for fishing. Okay. So I went for, you know, in one of my faculty friends' boat. And after till the evening, we did fishing, but experience was very good. So somebody called me back from India, one of my old, you know, colleague or senior as a professor. He said, "So Ajay, what you did during the weekend?" And I said, "It was a fun." He said, "What you were doing? Tell me." And I said, "I was fishing." "So how much you catch?" I said, "No, I didn't catch a single fish." "Why? So what you were doing?" I said, 8 hours we were fishing. "And you didn't?"
You were
find
throwing bait in the water
fish?"
and drinking beer. That's the important part of it.
Oh,
I have never
you're
caught a
saying
fish in my life
catching
either.
fish and throwing fish back to the river. And you're saying, you guys are very funny American. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why also relevance of the fish.
Well, it's really interesting. Everybody remembers the fish. Nobody remembers the adjective.
Yes.
And so I have people who's like, "You're like big fish, little fish, something." I don't remember what, but you're the fish guy. And I don't know why that is. It's very strange because, you know, small fish is not exactly an unknown phrase, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So, you know, I work in the roller coaster nowadays in my life. I don't know what I'm doing. So I am working in, you know, the entire COVID in India. I work in the night, and then part of the night, Israel attacked with the Philistine and Israel.
Right.
And then I work here on ag and startup cluster and all the kind of thing. I said, I don't know what I'm doing. Fishing was a better life than doing all these things. I should have stayed in the university and doing things. These are not wonderful stuff. But
Yeah.
you know, the damage is already done. So I don't regret anymore.
Yeah. All right, Ken, I guess I throw it back to you.
Super. All right. Well, we'll just stop the recording.
Good discussion today.
Yeah, it was great.